Welcome back to my channel, Starbooze.
Louises, I understand. I apologize deeply. I in my workplace. I have another pair. I had better fetch them for you then. I'll meet you in the studio. The man who had the potential to be Thephis that all children admired, charming, courageous, and strong-willed Superman was brought by George Reeves to life on screen in such a way that people were able to accept heroes as real. To many, he was more than just an actor. He was Superman. What's terrible is that but when he unexpectedly passed away, in 1959, fans did not attend his burial, anticipated there were no crowds, that there were no cameras. Hollywood, where he was quiet and a former star. Just a small group of folks arrived to bid farewell. The silence was almost too silent for someone so well known. How could that be? The person who was adored by Matt up saying goodbye in such a lonely way. Is it simply the wrong moment and location? Or perhaps there weren't any darker explanations on why people chose not to go and remained apart. The outcome from Behind the Cape, the Man edition. What caused the world to reject when Superman was at his best? Why the whole George Reeves thing? The first Superman, George Reeves, was born in 1914 on January 5th. Iowa's Wooltalk. They gave him the name when George Keffer Brewer first arrived into the world. Regretfully, his parents divorced shortly after he was born, and the majority of George's moving about with his mother as a child. Kentucky was their first stop, followed by Illinois. Eventually they traveled to California, where they remained. In California, George Echelin's mother wed a man named Frank. Solo. George was adopted by Frank, and after that, his name was Bestsello George. But this marriage was also short-lived. Helen informed George of Frank's passing, following their separation. However, as George grew older, he discovered that Frank remained alive. This sentimental he struggled greatly with disorientation, and he had it for a long time. Having went through all of the highs and lows of in his early years, George continued to find happiness. In the creative arts. He was a performer, a passionate student, who was also a singer and performer. After graduating from he attended Pasadena Junior High School, college, before relocating to Pasadena. Well-known acting school is called Playhouse. There additionally, he met Eleonora Needles, whom he eventually wed in 1940. The couple were married more than 10 years later when they parted ways in 1950. Most likely in 1939, George's big break came with a minor role in the film Gone with the Wind. Despite being small, the role was sufficient to draw attention to him. Then he swiftly negotiated a deal with Warner Brothers, and he formally changed at that time. George Reeves was his stage name. He continued to be active in the ensuing years, but just a small percentage of the films that have acted were of excellent quality, prosperous, and they should be films that benefited his career. Later, George signed with 20th Century Fox. However, that arrangement was similarly brief, in 1942, but he was chosen for a war drama. Thus we are happy to have given him a new wisdom. He chose to enlist in the military, Hesteted serving in the U.S. Army in early 1943, and was subsequently allocated to the Army. Air Forces. In addition to being the play's principal, actor Winged Victory appeared in the film as well. Version in addition to training recordings movies aimed at troops. After the war ended, George returned to Hollywood. However, the responsibilities that were few in the industry were made available to him that was charting a new path. He agreed all of the work at his disposal, even playing little parts in movies. Additionally, there was a period when he was excavating cesspools for financial gain. George received an offer in 1951 to appear in a new television show as Superman. At first, he wasn't particularly excited due to the fact that television at the time wasn't given the respect it deserves today, but the show gained a lot of popularity. That made George a famous person. Nevertheless, the triumph was not without some disadvantages. George was consequently so linked to the Superman's persona that everyone forgot his previous responsibilities. His agreement did prevent him from working on other tasks. Unsuccessful plans for a comeback. In the late, George Reeves was in a hard spot in the 1950s circumstance. Fans adored him as Superman, was unable to eliminate Thephis. The majority of casting directors were unable to identify him as a person apart from the steely man. He had turned into a stereotype. Regardless of how much Hollywood didn't offer him what he tried, major performing parts these days. In addition to he felt extremely let down by the meager pay he was given for such a large and a challenging work. Honestly, George desired greater autonomy in his inventiveness and also deviate from the Superman image. Thus he developed an intent to produce his TV program. He gave it a name. He also penned the port of entry script. His plan was to shoot the series in locations such as Mexico and Hawaii, which would make it more daring. Global flair. George's perspective on the narrative was uplifting and ambitious strategy. But nobody was willing to contribute funds for the initiative, so merely remained in the planning stage. At today, the adventures team of Superman was not getting along well. Either. They were unable to locate someone who could take George's place. After that, they made a far better offer to him to return, allegedly at a cost of $5,000 each week, which, at the time, was a substantial sum. especially if we take into account that they only took recordings for a few weeks throughout the year. George made the decision to return. Despite his inner struggles, as there was nothing else he could do, options and financial issues. In 1959, nearly everything was prepared for the new season's entrance. While the outfits were being altered, the new scripts were being written by authors, and they gathered the actors. George, who remained skeptical about being Superman, was said to be 45 years old and planning to begin shooting shortly. Despite the fact that he was a little uncertain, but something unexpected happened. Prior to the manufacturing could begin, George Reeves passed away unexpectedly. The entertainment sector was stunned following the news. The cheerful Superman and the kind of smile that came from the television millions of viewers' screens were in. Additionally, the ambiguous conditions of his demise was present from the start, and some believed that he had taken his own life, others that he had been killed, and the gossip had never ceased. Rather than a return, it became a catastrophe. George Reeves is the name that is still being used. Toto wondered what had happened. His life was filled with hopelessness and unmet expectations. Tragically, it all occurred at the time he was preparing for an additional performance as the Steelman. Engagement, aspirations for a career and financial. Reeves was by 1958 not just undergoing several changes not only in his career but also in his private life. He had recently finished his connection to Toni Manx. The spouse of Eddie Manx was a strong executive at MGM. Then George and Leonore Lemon became engaged and extroverted and vocal. Social attorney for her untamed personality and superior way of life. Not long after their split, the pair was allegedly preparing June 19, 1959, for a wedding, and then departing for Tijuana on a honeymoon that appeared from the outside that George was ready to make a fresh start, a fresh marriage, potential employment prospects, and a new phase in life. Perhaps, but it was very different in private. We must examine what was happening behind scenes. George was going through various monetary issues that had told his closest pals about it, and for instance, to his mother. The people's projected income from him was not truth about his financial situation. In spite of his sobriety utilizing the Superman television series as a for comparison, the salary is not exorbitant by Hollywood norms, especially because of their restricted shooting schedule. He was only able to spend the few weeks of the year working. George, however, remained hopeful. The show indicated that the return of Superman's adventures was still feasible, and that tiny light at conclusion of the tunnel that held him back moving. Furthermore, he was trying to make the switch to directing. To deliver this, Phyllis Coates, who brought the initiative to life, represented Lois Lane at the start of George was sponsored by the series. He pondered belief this project would be the one that would at last free him from the Superman's identity, which had evolved into his, and may therefore provide him with a new beginning. Regretfully, the funds didn't come through, making it impossible for him to launch undertaking. He certainly had other opportunities awaited, but the problem was that at one point, they were all related to Superman once more. A Superman stage show took place, planned for July, and the notion of the tour performance, and they were talking about Australia. But those were the occupations that could continue to remind George that he was unable of leaving the cave. Despite his advanced age of 55, even though they might have aided in his financial situation, he was in a challenging circumstance, or he was no longer renowned but not truly free at the same time. He was loved by the masses as Superman. However, he wasn't inclined to follow this role indefinitely. Although George Reeves had a lot of ambition, actually he was in a pretty decent position, increasingly intricate, and it appeared Toe had already started to influence his emotions adversely. Behind the cape was the man. Despite George Reeves's feeling some sick of playing Superman character and only being recognized as such, his loved ones never stopped talking about him regarding his personality in a very favorable manner. People would typically tell tales about his kindness, being grounded and respectful. He seemed to have been among the few men in the entertainment sector who were intrinsically set. To a lot of his fellow actors, he was more than simply Superman on screen. He was a truly kind man off camera as well. A sign was hanging there. Honest George said in the changing room. George, the friend of the people, the sort of moniker that suited him exactly. He was kind to everyone from the studio's commercial aspect to those who were employed there. He was courteous, compassionate, and always willing to assist, particularly to the kids who were his greatest admirers and wished to see him exclusive like Superman. George understood that playing a hero in children's was a significant duty, and hadn't considered it a joke. Above of it, during a fresh journey of advertising the program in the southern United States, George was appointed Colonel of Kentucky as an honorific title. Even so, it was a light jokingly that gesture was crucial for him. Upon his arrival back at the studio, the prop department had modified the text on the sign of his dressing room. It was novel. George Honest, also called Reeves Colonel. This was among the times when, despite being little, it showed not just the people's admiration for him, but additionally, his readiness to be acknowledged as not only a man in a cape. That scene was undoubtedly neither a joke nor a It made reference to the real person who created Superman. George pointed to inform others about his extra abilities as a performer as well, a human person as well. Additionally, it is worthwhile pointing out that even though his career in latter life, his kindness, humility, and a friendly disposition were firmly embedded in the recollection of everyone who was given the chance to work alongside him. In the end, George Reeves possibly the one who performed the Superman's function for the general public, but too he was close to those in his inner circle. Was merely truthful George, the companion of the people, an off-screen role model. George Reeves was more than simply a television hero. In real life, he made an effort to live like one. As well. He realized that being Superman carried a great deal of responsibility, particularly since so many children looked according to him, that it was significant to him. To begin with, despite the fact that George smoked, he made sure never to do it in private, in front of cameras or kids. He was aware that children thought he was Superman, and despite his continued fame, actual acting roles were getting harder to come by and less common because he didn't wish to create a negative for instance. In the end, he even gave up quitting smoking, in part due to how crucial his reputation had become to young admirers. George also retained his private personal life. He didn't wish to be impacted by any controversies or negative publicity where children perceived him. When he revealed appearances, he was consistently cozy and amiable, making the effort to greet kids that loved him. However, he didn't stop there. George backed significant causes. He put forth effort to raising funds and awareness for myasthenia gravis, a severe illness that impacts the mind. He rose to the position of national chairman for the Foundation for Myasthenia Gravis. In 1955, that part demonstrated his desire to make excellent use of his fame. At its core, George Reeves actually loved people, children in particular. He wasn't only a fictional figure on television. He was an inspiration and real-life hero. Compassion, fortitude, and optimism. George. The death of Reeves. In the evening of June on the 16th of 1959, a tragedy took place that will always be associated with the name of Reeves. George. Between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, the actor was discovered dead in the morning with a head wound from a bullet in the bedroom of his Benedict Canyon residence, Los Angeles. He was only 40-5. Additionally, it was disclosed that George was not. The house was empty at the time. His Leonor Lemon, the fiancée, and several pals were in the lower level, according to Leonor, present in the living room when the gunshot was fired. Conversely, Fred George's pal Crane provided Quiddy an alternative account of what happened, stating he had been informed by someone that Leonor was far nearer the bedroom when it occurred. It is claimed that following the shot, Leonor hurried downstairs and repeatedly, "Telly was down here with them. Informed them that I was down here." How real is that? Many contested the line. According to investigators, the death was an instance of suicide, though many odd things caused people to question the choice. First of all, it should be noted that there were no fingerprints on the discovered firearm. Furthermore, there is no trace of gunpowder on George's hands. It fell, but the cops may not have at that time been quite thorough in it. Even Evan Stranger was the bullet that killed him, was found in the roof, and two additional there were bullets on the ground. They came from a single weapon at his feet, but no one at home remembered multiple gunshots. There wasn't sign of a struggle or break in the autopsy. Official remarks and police have been guided by witness statements to determine that the situation is suicide. But a lot of admirers and even some pals, however, they were not persuaded. Leonor subsequently stated that George was depressed. According to her, he had his career has no chance. He had created many tries to surpass Superman. However, there was no success. In one of her phrases in the police report was stated, namely, he's most likely going to go shoot himself. Following this statement, there was a gunshot, and she allegedly "See there, I told you so," was said again. The mountain is where George Reeves was laid to rest. View Cemetery in California's Altadena. Nevertheless, he was honored after his passing, whilst a number of factors contributed to the mystery surrounding his death. He received Astor on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood in 1964. His work on television. DC Comics listed him as one of the 50 people who created DC. Fantastic in 1985, a worthy tribute to the man who gave Superman millions of individuals. Hollywood, drama, and doubt mystery. During George Reeves found dead, while others were pretty certain it was a suicide. Debatey, first person to question this, to be honest, was Helen Basolo, his mother. She was certain that her son would never be able to carry out such an action. She claims that the police had not brought up the issue of whether or not it was suicide, the appropriate to pay attention. She even went so far as to employing a lawyer by the name of one well-known one was Jerry Giesler to look at the matter more thoroughly. Primarily, a second autopsy was carried out on George's physique. The results were mostly consistent with those of the first. However, there were some new. This time, the health experts noted that George's head has multiple injuries and physique bruising that wasn't described in detail. That truth simply deepened the mystery. No solid was present. Proof of criminal activity after around a month, looking, and Gessler progressively instead endorsing the original ways. He believed that the George himself fired the shot, and consequently he left the case. but the hoax didn't disappear. However, some Hollywood insiders weren't very persuaded by the tally of suicide. Rory Calhoun, an actor, any one of George's close pals, said a reporter Hollywood didn't believe the account of the suicide. Gig and Alan Ladd, young well-known actors, didn't think the official version as well. Then there was Eddie Manx's problem, who was in an executive role at MGM and possessed a great deal of power. George had been experiencing liaison with Tony Manx, Eddie's wife, for a long time. According to some, this love affair could have resulted in a darker side of the narrative. The Hollywood book Nancy and Sam Kasner's kryptonite, according to show. The rumors were circulating the idea that Eddie Manx was a Sameen making jokes with the mafia. So to disguise, they might have had George assassinated, either to get even or to exact revenge. The circumstances were becoming increasingly pretty when George ended his relationship with Tony Manx and made the decision to wed Leon Orleman. The June 2025 issue of People magazine edition claims that this unexpected perhaps change was the cause of the hot situation's outburst. Currently, George Reeves' passing is still the topic of conversation in Hollywood, with people in dire need attempting to solve the mystery. According to some, he was going through internal pain alone, being aware of his suffering. Others are adamant certain that the newest item on the surface of celebrity heartache and betrayal was merely a cover for what actually happens behind closed doors. Why no one attended his funeral following the death of George Reeves. The third world awaited a Hollywood masterpiece. Burial. He was, after all, their Superman. However, it was not to be. The farewell ceremony was nearly not noticeable to the general public. The funeral was held at the Wayside Los Angeles Chapel of the Gates Funeral Home July 1, 1959. Angels was quite covert. Few people, close friends, came. People such as Noel Gig, Young Neil and Don Dior. There was not a single well-known Hollywood celebrity from to business leaders in attendance, and that it was barely mentioned in the media. So why did Hollywood essentially disappear? Superman. Many experts believe it's because fear. Reeves's passing was surrounded by scandal and murderous rumors. He had been affectionately associated with Tony Manx, wife of Eddie, a powerful MGM messenger, man with suspected mafia ties. Manx relationships. There was conjecture that his death was not a suicide, and Al didn't want to cross Hollywood's movers and shakers based on reports of acquaintances in the company. Attendance was, in addition to being low, it was actively. Now, several insiders acknowledged it. It was essentially disclosed that no one should come. Therefore, rather than a star-studded farewell, it turned into a whispery, sterilized ceremony. If you pause, silence is deafening when you think about it. Not just Hollywood mourned George's death of Reeves, but it backed off as thuffers tend to speak up or be observed. To avoid the unwelcome attention, pay attention to them. His funeral service was a metaphor for the speed at which fame and loyalty wanes when the story turns into complex. Grief was not the only thing that kept others at bay. It was guilt, fear, as well as an eraser. Hollywood had given up on its possessed Superman, a movie that brought old wounds back to life. In 2006, the film Hollywoodland was released out, and it generated curiosity about another mystery surrounding George Reeves' death. Ben Affleck portrayed George in the role. Reeves. Tony Manx was Diane Lane. Adrian Brody played a role for a made-up private investigator. Louis Seymour was called. Seymour was a fictional character, although his disposition differed from that of Milo, the actual detective Asperio. Although he was somewhat modeled after him, it was Milo Spurgio who had been looking into George's passing, and George's mother employed him. The movie was narrating the tale via many truths and some fiction can be found, in addition to investigating a number of money hypotheses for how Reeves could be murdered. It made no effort to persuade the audience that only a specific theory is accurate, but instead it displayed a variety of choices, every single one narrating that they are the complicated element and the total perplexity of the entire narrative. One explanation might be that George had his fiancée unintentionally shot in a drunken argument with Leonore Lemon. According to an alternative thesis, Eddie Manx, Tony's spouse and the most strong man in that region, possibly Theon, who gave the order to assassinate George. Consequently, retaliation for Tony, who departed for having an affair with him. The third edition portrayed Tony as the one who critiqued relocation due to her lack of acceptance and felt envious that nobody desired her. Consequently, she entered the house using the private entrance that she was still familiar with from earlier times. Additionally, the most widely accepted theory was the one that the really depressed Tolt, who felt totally inadequate in his personal and professional life, chose to take his own life. The film considers suicide to be the most probably rational, but does so in a manner that feels both sorrowful and provocative. The character of Adrian Brody, who begins infatuated with fame and wealth, ends up saddened by what he discovers. The emotional toll of the case forces him to reevaluate his life, which causes him to halt chasing news stories and begin making payments focus on his own family. Years later, the picture of George Reeves reappeared in The Flash, a 2023 DC movie, where a digital representation of him as Superman made a fleeting appearance on the screen. Although it was intended to be an homage, the CGI version did not sit well with the fans' sensation that it wasn't comfortable, particularly considering the tragic and intricate tale behind the individual who initially brought Superman in real life. The life of George Reeves was, with many twists and turns, some upsetting, some thrilling, a began by pursuing his goals with large hopes, and occasionally it appeared as though he had actually succeeded. He was charming in talented appearance and ability. People grinned when they caught a glimpse of him on screen. Children looked up to him. However, behind the scenes, George was constantly looking for greater independence, greater respect, and more. Not only was he the man in thick copy, he sang, played guitar, and went on tour with Nation, and worked hard to demonstrate that had perhaps more than one job. He returned the favor, was nice, and never pretended to be too large for anyone. However, in spite of all, he frequently felt confined by a sector that adored him in the role of Superman, but was unaware how do we handle the man underneath. It's not simply about his death, it's regarding his existence in the shadows of the hate. Gained notoriety. The cheers, though the superhero cape and grins, were just a portion of his reality. The other component was quiet, intricate, and frequently slated. Even now, people continue to discuss George Reeves, not just due to the fact that his life came to an end, but they see something genuine about him. A man attempting to pursue, a man with greater significance to admire more than he most likely ever understood. And perhaps that is the portion that endures us. The notion that a person who previously felt invisible is still recalled, even, and continues to be important to many people. We appreciate you staying and join us as we delve into George Reeves' story. There were many highs and lows throughout his life, notoriety and annoyance. However, his legacy as Superman and a man continued to touch even decades later. If you discovered this tale is painful, fascinating, and/or enlightening, remember to enjoy it. And if you'd like a deeper investigation into the legends of Hollywood, untold tales and authentic behind-the-scenes mysteries, you be sure to sign up for the channel and press the alert button to ensure you don't miss any uploads till the next time. Be careful, and keep in mind that not all capes are worn by heroes.